Woke up to my roommate peeing on my wall. Called his name. No response. He just went back to bed, like nothing happened. Told him in the morning, and he got mad at me for not stopping him. Now I'm haunted by that night. But somehow I'm the bad guy. The night my room became a waterfall. I never imagined that the most memorable night of my life would involve a waterfall in my bedroom. But that's exactly what happened when my life intersected with Jake's, an unlikely housemate who brought chaos and unexpected companionship into my otherwise predictable world. My name is Alex, and at 28, I've been a freelance graphic designer for the better part of my adult life. My work keeps me tethered to my modest apartment, a space that has become a sanctuary for both creativity and solitude. The walls are lined with art supplies and sketches, remnants of late-night bursts of inspiration. It's a place where I can lose myself in colors and lines, a refuge from the bustling city outside. The decision to take on a housemate was not born out of necessity, but rather a blend of curiosity and a desire to help. Jake entered my life like a whirlwind, a 19-year-old kid who seemed to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. He was struggling financially, a reality that resonated deeply with me, having navigated my own share of lean years. Despite the age difference and his quirks, one of which was a history of sleepwalking, I felt compelled to offer him a room, a safe harbor from whatever storms he was facing. Our initial days living together were a dance of awkwardness and discovery. Jake was tall and lanky, the kind of person who seemed to take up more space than his physical form actually required. His presence was a mix of youthful exuberance and an old soul's weariness. We navigated new boundaries and routines, adjusting to shared spaces and the silent agreement to respect each other's quirks. Jake's sleepwalking episodes were mostly benign, and truth be told, they added a layer of bemusement to our living arrangement. He would wander around the apartment at odd hours, mumbling incoherently as if conversing with ghosts only he could see. I found his nocturnal adventures more endearing than troubling, a harmless quirk I chalked up to youthful energy and stress. But then came the night everything changed. It was a Tuesday, a day that had dragged on with a relentless tide of client revisions and creative block. By the time I crawled into bed, exhaustion wrapped around me like a heavy blanket, pulling me into a deep, dreamless sleep. I was adrift in that blissful void when a sudden brightness pierced the darkness, jolting me awake. The light from my bedroom lamp, harsh and unforgiving, illuminated a scene so surreal it could have been a painting from a Salvador Dali exhibition. There was Jake, standing in the corner of my room, pants down, urinating on the wall with the oblivious composure of someone watering a garden. It was a tableau of absurdity, and for a moment I simply watched, suspended between disbelief and the urge to intervene. "Jake," I called softly, hoping to rouse him from his somnambulant state. But my voice was a whisper against the tide of his sleep. I tried again, louder this time, but he remained unresponsive, eyes glazed over, lost in whatever dreamscape his mind had conjured. As I sat there, witnessing this bizarre spectacle, a part of me wanted to laugh at the sheer ridiculousness of it all. But another part, the one grounded in reality, grappled with the helplessness of the moment. This was my room, my sanctuary, and here it was, being transformed into a waterfall by a sleepwalking teenager. Eventually, Jake finished his nocturnal task and with the same dreamlike detachment, returned to his bed, curling up with a pillow as if nothing had happened. I was left alone in the aftermath, the room silent save for the soft hum of the city outside, my mind reeling from the absurdity of it all. In the stillness, I found myself torn between emotions. Should I be angry? Amused? Concerned for Jake and what might be causing such episodes? I lay awake for hours, the quiet punctuated by the occasional drip of water from the wall, each drop a reminder of the night's bizarre turn of events. And so, the night my room became a waterfall marked a turning point in my relationship with Jake. An episode that would test the boundaries of patience, humor, and understanding in ways I never anticipated. Little did I know, it would also lay the foundation for a bond forged in shared embarrassment and the peculiar unpredictability of life. The morning after the night, my room became a waterfall. I awoke to the soft, persistent drizzle of rain tapping against my window. It was a gentle reminder that the universe had a strange sense of humor, as if the weather was in cahoots with Jake's sleepwalking antics. I lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, trying to process the surreal events of the previous night. The faint smell of ammonia lingered, a stark testament to the fact that it hadn't been just a bizarre dream. Reluctantly, I pulled myself out of bed, my feet meeting the cool, slightly damp floor. I shuffled to the kitchen, where the smell of freshly brewed coffee greeted me, a small comfort amidst the morning's awkwardness. Jake was already there, sitting at the tiny breakfast nook, his face buried in a mug that looked far too large for his hands. His hair was a tousled mess, and he wore the expression of someone who had barely slept. "Morning," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral as I poured myself a cup. "Hey," Jake mumbled, not meeting my eyes. His voice was barely audible, muffled by the ceramic rim of his mug. I sat down across from him, the silence stretching between us like an invisible wall. The words were there, hovering in the air, but neither of us seemed ready to utter them. Eventually, the necessity of addressing the elephant in the room, or rather, the puddle in the corner, became unavoidable. "So, about last night," I began, choosing my words carefully. "You had a bit of a sleepwalking episode." Jake's eyes widened slightly, a flush creeping up his cheeks as the reality of what I was implying sank in. I did what?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the conversation ahead. "You came into my room, turned the light on, and well, you relieved yourself on the wall. It was unexpected." For a moment, Jake looked like he might laugh, but the humor was quickly overshadowed by mortification. He buried his face in his hands, groaning softly. "Oh God, Alex, I'm so sorry." His embarrassment was palpable, and I couldn't help but chuckle at the absurdity of it all. "Hey, it's okay. I mean, it's not okay, but it's not the end of the world either." Jake peeked at me through his fingers, his expression a mix of shame and bewilderment. "Why didn't you stop me?" "I tried," I replied, shrugging helplessly. "But you were pretty deep in the zone. It's not like you were in any state to listen." He sighed, his hands dropping to the table. "I really didn't mean to. I've done some weird things while sleepwalking, but this is next level." "Yeah, it's a first for me too," I admitted, trying to lighten the mood. "But hey, it makes for a pretty unique story, right?" Jake's lips twitched, a reluctant smile tugging at the corners. "I guess. Still, I'll clean it up. It's the least I can do." As he stood and moved toward the cleaning supplies, I watched him wrestle with a mix of emotions. There was the obvious embarrassment, but beneath it I could sense a defensiveness, a need to prove that he wasn't just some irresponsible kid. It was a moment that highlighted the fragility of our newfound living arrangement, the delicate balance we were trying to maintain. As he scrubbed the wall, the tension between us slowly began to dissipate. I leaned against the doorframe, sipping my coffee and offering occasional words of encouragement. It was a strange bonding experience, one that neither of us could have anticipated, but it was also oddly cathartic. "Thanks for, not freaking out," Jake said, looking over his shoulder with a sheepish grin. "I know this must be a lot." I shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant. "Life's full of surprises, right? Besides, it's not every day your room turns into a water feature." He chuckled, the sound genuine and relieving. "You're a good sport, Alex. I'll try to keep my subconscious in check from now on." "I'd appreciate that," I said, smiling. "But seriously, don't worry too much about it. We'll figure this out." As Jake finished cleaning, the morning light filtering through the windows seemed to soften the harsh edges of our awkwardness. We spent the rest of the day navigating the usual routines, the incident gradually fading into the background as life returned to its familiar rhythm. Yet, despite the return to normalcy, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us. There was a newfound understanding, a shared experience that had drawn us closer in ways I hadn't expected. It was as if the absurdity of the situation had stripped away some of the barriers between us, leaving behind a connection built on mutual acceptance and a touch of humor. As the days passed, I found myself reflecting on the unpredictability of life and the strange twists that brought Jake and me together. In a world where everything seemed so uncertain, it was these peculiar moments that reminded me of the value of human connection, however unexpected it might be. In the weeks that followed, Jake remained vigilant, taking extra precautions to minimize his sleepwalking episodes. We laughed about it often, the incident becoming a kind of inside joke, a testament to the resilience of our friendship. And as I lay in bed at night, the faint sound of rain tapping against the window, I found comfort in the knowledge that even in chaos, there was room for growth and understanding. Ultimately, the night my room became a waterfall was a turning point, an unexpected lesson in patience, empathy, and the strange, tangled ways our lives intersect. It left me with a sense of acceptance, an acknowledgement that life is often messy and unpredictable, but also beautifully, wonderfully human. The days following that unforgettable night were a strange blend of awkwardness and introspection. Every time I stepped into the room, I couldn't help but imagine Jake standing in the corner, a sleepwalking specter caught in an act of unbridled absurdity. It was as if my room had taken on an additional dimension, one where the walls whispered stories of late-night waterfalls that defied logic and left me oscillating between laughter and disbelief. Jake, on the other hand, seemed to retreat into himself, a noticeable change from the slightly awkward but generally cheerful guy who had moved in just weeks before. He was more self-conscious, his usual chatter subdued, as if he feared that at any moment his nocturnal misadventure would become the elephant in the room. I could tell he was embarrassed, despite my attempts to reassure him that I wasn't holding a grudge. Humor, I had learned, was an invaluable tool in diffusing tension, and I tried to wield it with precision, making light jokes about nighttime plumbing services or suggesting we invest in a nightlight to ward off any future mishaps. But despite my efforts, there were moments when irritation bubbled to the surface. Waking up to a damp carpet and a lingering odor wasn't exactly the highlight of my morning, and the fact that my sleep had been interrupted didn't help matters. Yet, every time frustration threatened to take over, I reminded myself of the broader picture: Jake's youth, his struggles, the vulnerability he must have felt in the aftermath of the incident. It was this understanding that kept my irritation in check, nurturing a burgeoning empathy that I hadn't anticipated. Our conversations, though initially stilted, gradually found their rhythm again. It was during one of these chats, over takeout containers and a rerun of some mindless sitcom, that Jake finally broke the ice. Honestly, he said, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. If I had to sleepwalk, why couldn't it have been something cool, like baking cookies or painting a masterpiece? I laughed, grateful for his attempt to lighten the mood. Well, your bladder certainly made a statement, I quipped, and just like that, the tension eased. We both knew that humor was our shared refuge, a way to process the incident without letting it define our cohabitation. As the days turned into weeks, our shared experience began to weave itself into the fabric of our friendship. It wasn't something we talked about openly all the time, but it lingered in the background, an unspoken understanding that added depth to our interactions. The incident had pulled back the curtain on vulnerability, exposing our flaws and fears, yet it was this very exposure that fostered a deeper connection. Jake began to open up more about his past, his sleepwalking episodes that were usually harmless, and his worries about the future. In return, I shared stories from my own life, my own missteps and lessons learned. We found common ground in our imperfections, building a camaraderie that transcended the initial awkwardness of our living arrangement. There were still moments of discomfort, of course, but they were softened by the realization that life, in all its unpredictability, was teaching us something valuable. The very act of navigating this chaotic, unexpected situation had brought with it lessons in patience, empathy, and acceptance. I began to see our cohabitation not as an inconvenience, but as an opportunity, a chance to grow, to learn from each other, and to embrace the quirks that made us uniquely human. One evening, as we sat on the balcony watching the city lights flicker in the distance, Jake turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "You know," he said, "if someone had told me a month ago that I'd be bonding with my roommate over sleepwalking disasters, I wouldn't have believed them." I chuckled, nodding in agreement. "Life has a funny way of throwing curveballs," I replied, "but maybe that's what makes it interesting." As we sat there, enveloped in a comfortable silence, I realized that our shared experience had taught me more than I had anticipated. It had shown me that connections often form in the most unexpected of ways, that laughter can be a powerful salve, and that sometimes the key to understanding others lies in embracing the chaos they bring. Our story, with its peculiar beginnings and uncertain trajectory, was still unfolding. There were no neatly tied endings, no clear resolutions, just the ongoing journey of two unlikely housemates finding their way through the labyrinth of life's unpredictability. And perhaps that was the beauty of it, knowing that in a world full of certainties and constraints, there was still room for surprises, for growth, for the peculiar magic that happens when you let go and simply embrace the ride. As I reflected on this, I felt a sense of acceptance wash over me, a recognition that life was as much about the unexpected joys as it was about the challenges. Jake and I had stumbled into each other's lives through necessity, but what we had found was an understanding that transcended circumstance, a friendship forged in a crucible of shared experience, tempered by humor, and strengthened by the realization that we were, in essence, two souls navigating the same unpredictable sea. And so, with curiosity and an open heart, I looked forward to whatever came next, knowing that whatever it was, we'd face it together, armed with laughter, empathy, and the knowledge that even the most mundane moments could hold a spark of the extraordinary.